The day Margaret Henderson stepped onto my dock and told me my 30-foot sailboat had to go, I had no idea she was about to cost herself and the entire Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association access to the only marina for 20 miles. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because this story changed everything. My name is David, and for 15 years, I lived what I thought was the American dream. I owned a beautiful ranch property in Montana, complete with 200 acres of pristine land that stretched right down to the shores of Crystal Lake. The property had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built the original cabin in 1952, and my father expanded it into the ranch house where I raised my own children. But here's the thing most people didn't realize about my property. It wasn't just land. When my grandfather purchased those 200 acres back in 1952, he also acquired the mineral and water rights to the entire eastern shore of Crystal Lake. More importantly, he built the only proper marina and boat launch on the lake. For decades, our family had allowed the growing community around the lake to use our marina free of charge. It was just neighborly, you know? The kind of small-town kindness that used to define places like this. When the Sunset Ridge development started going up in 2018, I was actually excited. New neighbors, new families, maybe some kids for my grandchildren to play with when they visited. The development was beautiful 35 custom homes, each worth between $800,000 and $1.2 million, all with gorgeous lake views. The HOA seemed professional, well-organized. Their covenants were reasonable, their maintenance standards were high. I had no reason to think there would be any problems. I was wrong. The problems started small, as they always do. Margaret Henderson moved into the largest house in Sunset Ridge in the spring of 2019. She was a retired corporate lawyer from Seattle, recently divorced, with more money than she knew what to do with, and apparently unlimited time to make that everyone else's problem. Within 6 months of moving in, Margaret had managed to get herself elected as the HOA president. Within another 6 months, she had transformed the Sunset Ridge HOA from a simple property maintenance organization into something that resembled a small-town dictatorship. At first, her focus was entirely within the development. Homeowners started getting fined for leaving their garbage cans out an hour too long. Families received violation notices for having children's toys visible in their yards. One couple got a formal complaint because their dog barked for 30 seconds when the mail carrier arrived. But as long as Margaret's crusade stayed within Sunset Ridge, it wasn't my problem. That changed on a Tuesday morning in June 2020. I was down at my dock, performing routine maintenance on my sailboat, a beautiful 1985 Catalina 30 that I'd restored myself over the course of 3 years. The boat was my pride and joy, my escape from the world when things got too complicated on land. I was checking the rigging when I heard footsteps on my dock. "Excuse me," came a sharp voice behind me. I turned around to see Margaret Henderson standing at the edge of my dock, wearing a perfectly pressed white blouse, khaki slacks, and an expression that could have curdled milk. She was holding a manila folder thick with papers. "Yes, ma'am. Can I help you?" "I'm Margaret Henderson, president of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. I need to discuss your boat with you." I set down my tools and wiped my hands on a rag. "My boat? What about it?" Margaret opened her folder and pulled out an official-looking document. According to the Crystal Lake Waterfront Preservation Ordinance, all watercraft moored on the lake must comply with specific aesthetic and environmental standards. Your vessel is in violation of several key provisions. I stared at her. "I'm sorry, what ordinance?" "The Crystal Lake Waterfront Preservation Ordinance. It was passed by the county commissioners 3 months ago at the request of the Sunset Ridge HOA. All lake residents received notification." That was news to me. I'd received no such notification. Ma'am, with all due respect, this is my property. My dock, my marina. I've had boats here for 15 years with no problems. Margaret's smile was cold enough to freeze water. Not anymore, you don't. As of July 1st, your boat either comes into compliance or it has to be removed from the lake entirely. She handed me a copy of the ordinance. As I scanned the pages, my blood began to boil. The aesthetic standards were clearly designed to target older boats like mine. Any vessel over 20 years old had to undergo a costly environmental impact assessment. Any boat with visible wear, fading, or cosmetic imperfections was subject to removal. The list went on and on, each requirement more ridiculous than the last. This is absurd, I said. My boat is in perfect working condition. I maintain it better than most people maintain their cars. Working condition is not the same as aesthetic compliance, Margaret replied. The residents of Sunset Ridge have invested significant money in their lakefront properties. We have a right to protect that investment from unsightly influences. The way she said unsightly influences made it clear she wasn't just talking about my boat. She was talking about me, my ranch, my family's 3-generation presence on this lake. We were the unsightly influences that needed to be managed. I'll need to review this ordinance with my attorney, I said carefully. Of course, you have until July 1st to achieve compliance or remove the vessel. Have a nice day, David. She turned and walked back toward the Sunset Ridge development, leaving me standing on my own dock, holding papers that threatened to take away something I'd cherished for 15 years. That night, I called my attorney, Jim Rodriguez. Jim had handled my family's legal matters for over a decade, and when I explained the situation, he was quiet for a long time. David, he finally said, this smells fishy. Let me do some digging into how this ordinance got passed. In the meantime, don't do anything hasty. And whatever you do, don't let them intimidate you into just giving up. But intimidation was exactly what Margaret had in mind, and she was just getting started. The harassment began 3 days after Margaret's visit to my dock. I came home from town to find an official notice taped to my front door. The Sunset Ridge HOA was filing a formal complaint with the county about unauthorized commercial activity on my property. Their claim? That by allowing other lake residents to use my marina, I was operating an unlicensed business. It was ridiculous, of course. I'd never charged anyone a cent for using my dock or boat launch. For 70 years, my family had simply allowed neighbors to moor their boats, launch their kayaks, or use our facilities for fishing. It was community courtesy, not commerce. But Margaret had found a way to weaponize even generosity. The complaint triggered a county investigation. For 2 weeks, I had inspectors crawling all over my property, measuring dock dimensions, photographing my boat, interviewing neighbors. It was humiliating and invasive, especially since I knew Margaret was orchestrating the entire charade. The county eventually dismissed the complaint, but not before costing me $3,000 in legal fees and countless hours of stress. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong again. Margaret's next move was more subtle, but far more damaging. She began reaching out to other lake residents, spreading rumors about my property. She told people I was planning to subdivide my land and turn it into a trailer park. She claimed my boat was leaking fuel into the lake. She suggested that my generosity in sharing marina access was actually a scheme to avoid paying proper taxes on commercial property. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter. Fear did. And Margaret was very good at manufacturing fear. By August, several longtime lake residents had stopped using my marina. The Johnsons, who'd been mooring their pontoon boat at my dock for 8 years, quietly moved it to a marina 20 miles away. The Martinez family, who brought their kids to fish off my pier every weekend, stopped coming. Even old Pete, a 70-year-old retiree who'd been launching his boss boat from my ramp for over a decade, started making the drive to the public launch on the other side of the lake. It broke my heart. These weren't just neighbors, they were friends. People I'd shared coffee with on Sunday mornings, people whose kids I'd taught to fish, people who'd become part of my extended family. And Margaret Henderson, a woman who'd lived here for barely over a year, had poisoned those relationships with lies and legal intimidation. But the worst was yet to come. In September, I received a certified letter that made my blood run cold. The Sunset Ridge HOA, with Margaret as president, was petitioning the county to invoke eminent domain on my marina and boat launch. They claimed the facilities were essential infrastructure that should be publicly owned and managed rather than remaining under private control. I sat in my kitchen, reading that letter 3 times before the full implications hit me. Margaret wasn't just trying to get rid of my boat. She was trying to steal my property, the marina and boat launch that my grandfather had built with his own hands, that my father had maintained for 40 years, that I'd upgraded and improved throughout my adult life. She wanted to take it all away and put it under HOA control. The legal brief was 47 pages of bureaucratic language, but the message was clear: surrender your marina, or we'll take it from you through the courts. That night, I called an emergency meeting with Jim Rodriguez. When I showed him the eminent domain petition, his face went pale. "David, I have to be honest with you. Eminent domain cases are incredibly expensive to fight, and if the county agrees that the marina constitutes essential public infrastructure, they can just take it? They'd have to pay you fair market value, but yes, they could take it." I felt something cold and heavy settle in my stomach. How much would it cost to fight this? Jim was quiet for a moment. Conservatively, $50,000 to $75,000. Maybe more. And there's no guarantee we'd win. I drove home that night, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. $75,000 was money I didn't have. My ranch was profitable, but not wealthy. I lived comfortably, but I didn't have the kind of money it would take to go to war with an HOA full of millionaires. That's when Margaret made her biggest mistake. She got greedy. 2 weeks after filing the eminent domain petition, she called me directly. I was surprised to hear from her all our previous communication had been through lawyers and official notices. But there she was on the phone, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "David, I know this legal situation has been stressful for you. I want you to know that the HOA board doesn't take pleasure in these proceedings." Could have fooled me. "I'm calling because I think we can reach a resolution that works for everyone. The HOA is prepared to withdraw the eminent domain petition in exchange for a private sale of your marina facilities. We're prepared to offer you fair market value, $150,000 for the dock, boat launch, and surrounding waterfront access." It was a trap, and I knew it. But I was curious to see how deep the trap went. And if I refuse, then I'm afraid the eminent domain proceedings will continue. And David, those can be very expensive to fight. Very expensive. It would be a shame for you to lose your entire ranch over a few boat slips. The threat was clear. Sell us your marina for $150,000, or we'll bankrupt you trying to take it through eminent domain. It was extortion, pure and simple. "I'll need to think about it," I said. "Of course, but don't think too long. The offer expires in 30 days. After she hung up, I sat in my living room, staring out at the lake that had been my family's sanctuary for 70 years. Margaret Henderson had systematically destroyed my relationships with my neighbors, cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees, and now she was threatening to take away the most precious part of my family's legacy. I felt defeated, exhausted, ready to give up. But then I remembered something my grandfather used to say: "When someone's trying to steal your land, boy, You better make damn sure you know exactly what land you're fighting for. That weekend, I drove into town and pulled every property record, survey map, and legal document related to my ranch. I spread them across my kitchen table and began to study them like my life depended on it. Because, as it turned out, it did. What I discovered in those dusty old documents would change everything. But Margaret Henderson had no idea what was coming. None of them did. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday evening in October. I'd been poring over property records for 3 weeks, my kitchen table buried under surveys, deeds, water rights documents, and legal opinions dating back to the 1940s. My eyes were burning from squinting at faded typewritten pages, and I was beginning to lose hope when I found it. It was a single paragraph, buried in my grandfather's original 1952 property deed, written in the formal legal language of the time. Said property shall include perpetual and exclusive rights to all water access points, marina facilities, and navigational infrastructure serving the eastern shore of Crystal Lake. Said rights to extend to all current and future residential developments utilizing said facilities. I read the paragraph 5 times before the full implications hit me. Then, I grabbed my phone and called Jim Rodriguez, even though it was nearly midnight. "Jim, I need you to look at something. Tonight?" An hour later, Jim was sitting at my kitchen table, studying the same documents I'd been wrestling with for weeks. When he reached the crucial paragraph in my grandfather's deed, he went very still. "David," he said quietly, "do you understand what this means?" "I think so, but I want to hear you say it." Jim looked up at me with something approaching awe. "This deed doesn't just give you ownership of the marina. It gives you exclusive control over all water access for any residential development that uses your facilities. Every house in Sunset Ridge, every property owner around the eastern shore of the lake, they all depend on your marina for water access." The pieces were falling into place. So when Margaret filed that eminent domain petition, she essentially admitted that Sunset Ridge depends on your marina facilities. Which means, according to this deed, you have the legal right to control their access. I felt something shift inside my chest. For 3 months, Margaret Henderson had been treating me like a powerless obstacle to be bulldozed out of the way. But she'd made a fundamental error. She'd never bothered to research exactly what she was trying to steal. "What are my options?" I asked. Jim was already making notes. "Well, the most obvious option is to simply deny access. If you own exclusive water rights, you can legally prohibit anyone from using your marina or even accessing the lake through your property." "All of them? The entire HOA? Every single resident of Sunset Ridge? They'd have to drive 20 miles to the public boat launch on the other side of the lake. And, David, there's something else. Look at this." He pointed to another section of the deed I hadn't fully understood. "Your grandfather's water rights don't just cover the marina. They cover the entire shoreline access for this section of the lake. That includes the small beach area where Sunset Ridge residents have been swimming and launching kayaks." I stared at the document. "So they can't even wade into the lake from their own properties?" "Not legally, no. The lake itself is public water, but access to it from the eastern shore is controlled by your deed." For the first time in months, I smiled. Margaret Henderson had spent so much energy trying to take my marina that she'd never considered the possibility that I might take away her entire community's access to the lake they'd paid millions of dollars to live on. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. First, I wanted to see just how far Margaret was willing to push. The next morning, I called her and accepted her offer to sell the marina for $150,000. But I had one small condition. I wanted to review the final sale documents with my attorney before signing. Margaret was practically giddy. "Of course, David." I'm so glad we could work this out amicably. I'll have the contracts drawn up by Friday." What Margaret didn't know was that I was buying time. While she was preparing to steal my Marina for a fraction of its true value, I was preparing my own surprise. Jim and I spent the following week quietly filing the necessary paperwork to formalize my exclusive water rights claim. We documented every instance of Sunset Ridge residents using lake access through my property. We photographed the informal beach area where HOA members had been swimming and launching kayaks. We mapped every inch of shoreline that fell under my grandfather's deed. Most importantly, we began the process of installing a fence. The fence wasn't just any fence. It was an 8-foot cedar privacy fence that would run along the entire boundary between my property and the Sunset Ridge development, extending all the way to the waterline. The fence would completely cut off Sunset Ridge residents from any water access except through my marina, the same marina Margaret thought she was about to own. On Friday afternoon, Margaret called with excitement in her voice. "David, the contracts are ready. Can we meet this afternoon to finalize the sale?" "Actually, Margaret, I've changed my mind." There was a long pause. "Excuse me?" I said, "I've changed my mind. The marina's not for sale." Her voice went ice cold. "David, you can't be serious. We have an agreement. We have a verbal conversation. No signed contracts, no binding commitment. My marina is not for sale at any price." Then the eminent domain proceedings continue. "I warned you, this would be expensive." "That's fine, Margaret. But I should probably warn you about something. While you've been planning to steal my marina, I've been doing some research of my own. Did you know that your entire development's lake access depends on easements through my property?" Another pause. Longer this time. "What are you talking about?" "Check your property deeds, Margaret. Check your HOA covenants. Check with your attorneys. And then ask yourself this. What happens to property values in Sunset Ridge when residents have to drive 40 miles round trip every time they want to use the lake?" I hung up before she could respond. Within 2 hours, my phone started ringing. First, Margaret called back, her voice shaking with rage. Then the HOA's attorney called. Then 3 different Sunset Ridge homeowners who'd somehow gotten my number. By evening, I'd received 17 calls, 12 voicemails, and 3 angry visitors at my front door. But the fence construction had already begun. I'd hired Morrison Contracting, the best fence company in the county, and I'd paid extra for rush installation. By Saturday morning, there were work crews installing posts along my entire property line. By Sunday evening, the framework was complete. By Tuesday, Sunset Ridge was completely cut off from the lake. The fence was beautiful, actually. 8 feet of smooth cedar planking with decorative post caps and professional staining. It looked like something you'd see around an expensive resort. But for the residents of Sunset Ridge, it might as well have been the Berlin Wall. Wednesday morning, I was sitting on my deck, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise over the lake when I heard shouting from the other side of the fence. Through the gaps in the cedar, I could see Margaret Henderson walking the fence line with 2 men in suits, probably lawyers or county officials. "This is illegal," she was yelling. "He can't just cut off access. We have rights." I finished my coffee, got dressed, and walked down to the marina. My sailboat was floating peacefully at the dock, exactly where she'd always been. The water was calm, the morning light was perfect, and for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. But Margaret Henderson was just getting started, and when she realized what I'd actually done, the real war was about to begin. Would you have trusted someone like Margaret if she'd approached you with that first complaint? Let me know in the comments, because what happened next made me question everyone's motives. The legal papers arrived by certified mail on Thursday morning. 3 separate lawsuits, all filed simultaneously by the Sunset Ridge HOA. One claimed I was creating a public nuisance by blocking access to the lake. Another accused me of violating county zoning ordinances. The third was a civil suit demanding $2.3 million in damages for the diminished property values my fence had allegedly caused. Margaret Henderson wasn't just angry anymore. She was in full-scale war mode. But she'd made one critical error. She'd filed those lawsuits without first checking whether I actually had the legal right to build my fence. And when her attorneys finally did their homework, they discovered what Jim Rodriguez and I already knew: every single one of their lawsuits was groundless. The county zoning hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. It was held in the courthouse conference room, with about 30 people packed into a space designed for 15. Margaret sat in the front row with 3 attorneys. I sat near the back with Jim Rodriguez and a folder full of documents that were about to change everything. County Commissioner Janet Walsh called the hearing to order. We're here to address complaints filed by the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association regarding a fence constructed on property owned by David Matthews. Mrs. Henderson, you may present your case. Margaret stood up, straightened her jacket, and launched into a presentation she'd clearly rehearsed. For 20 minutes, she explained how my fence was destroying property values, blocking traditional lake access, and violating the community spirit that made Crystal Lake special. She had charts, graphs, and photographs. She had testimonials from angry homeowners. She even had an environmental impact study claiming that concentrating all boat traffic through one marina would damage the lake's ecosystem. It was an impressive performance. If I hadn't known better, I might have been convinced. When Margaret finished, Commissioner Walsh turned to me. Mr. Matthews, how do you respond to these allegations? I stood up slowly. I'd been dreading this moment and looking forward to it in equal measure. Commissioner Walsh, I'd like to start by reading something. I pulled out my grandfather's original property deed. This document, recorded with the county in 1952, grants my family perpetual and exclusive rights to all water access points, marina facilities, and navigational infrastructure serving the eastern shore of Crystal Lake. The room went quiet. Margaret's face went pale. Furthermore, I continued, this deed specifies that these rights extend to all current and future residential developments utilizing said facilities. The Sunset Ridge development has been utilizing my marina facilities since 2018. Every homeowner in that development has been accessing the lake through my property, with my permission, free of charge, for over 2 years. Commissioner Walsh leaned forward. Are you saying the HOA residents have been trespassing? No, ma'am. I'm saying they've been guests. But when the HOA filed eminent domain proceedings against my property and attempted to force a sale of my marina, they essentially declared war on my family's property rights. I have the legal authority to revoke their access, which is exactly what I've done. Jim Rodriguez stood up and handed the commissioner a stack of documents. Commissioner Walsh, we've filed all necessary paperwork to formalize Mr. Matthews' water rights claim. You'll find copies of the original deed, survey maps, and legal opinions confirming that Mr. Matthews' actions are entirely within his rights as a property owner. Margaret jumped to her feet. This is ridiculous. You can't just trap an entire community away from the lake. There have to be easements, public access rights, something. Commissioner Walsh was studying the documents Jim had provided. After several minutes, she looked up with a troubled expression. Mrs. Henderson, I'm afraid Mr. Matthews appears to be correct. The original property deed clearly establishes his exclusive water rights, and I don't see any recorded easements that would override those rights. But what about our property values? What about our investments? We bought those homes specifically because of lake access. Ma'am, that's a civil matter between you and your real estate agents or developers. From a zoning perspective, Mr. Matthews's fence appears to be legal and properly constructed. The hearing was over. Margaret Henderson and her 3 attorneys walked out in stunned silence. Several Sunset Ridge homeowners lingered afterward, approaching me with expressions ranging from anger to desperation. One woman, probably in her 60s, grabbed my arm as I was leaving. "Please, Mr. Matthews, I'm not part of this HOA nonsense. I just want to take my grandchildren fishing. Isn't there some way we can work this out?" I looked at her and saw genuine pain. She wasn't Margaret Henderson. She was just a grandmother who'd innocently bought a lakefront home and found herself caught in the crossfire of Margaret's war. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to hurt innocent people, but your HOA president declared war on my family's property. Until that changes, my marina remains closed." That evening, I received a call from Tom Bradley, one of the original Sunset Ridge homeowners, and someone who'd always been friendly toward me. "David, I need to ask you something man to man. What would it take to end this? Not for Margaret, but for the rest of us. Some of us had nothing to do with her schemes." I'd been waiting for this call. "Tom, here's the situation. Margaret Henderson cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees, months of stress, and tried to steal my family's property. She turned my neighbors against me with lies and harassment. She filed false complaints, threatened eminent domain, and attempted to force me into a sale at below-market prices." "I understand you're angry." "I'm not angry anymore, Tom. I'm done. But if the HOA wants access to my marina, they need to make this right. What would that look like?" I'd been thinking about this for weeks. First, Margaret Henderson resigns as HOA president immediately. Second, the HOA withdraws all lawsuits and legal actions against me. Third, they issue a formal written apology for the harassment and false complaints. And fourth, they compensate me for my legal expenses, $47,000. Tom was quiet for a moment. That's a lot, David. This cost me. If they want to continue using my marina free of charge like they have for the past 2 years, those are my terms. And if they agree to all that, you'll tear down the fence?" "I'll tear down the fence, restore full marina access, and we can go back to being neighbors instead of enemies." 3 days later, Tom called back. "David, we've got a problem. Margaret refuses to resign. She's convinced the other board members that giving in to your demands would set a dangerous precedent. She says if they cave to you, every property owner around the lake will start making demands. Then I guess they don't really want lake access. What if some of us organized to remove Margaret from the board? Would that be enough?" I thought about it. "Tom, I don't care how you handle your HOA politics. But until Margaret Henderson is gone and my conditions are met, that fence stays up. Give us 2 weeks." 2 weeks later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Tom's voice was exhausted but triumphant. "David, it's done. Margaret's out. We called a special election, and she lost by a landslide. The new board voted unanimously to meet your conditions." "All of them?" "All of them. Apology, compensation, withdrawal of lawsuits, everything. We just want this nightmare to end." The next morning, I called Morrison Contracting and scheduled the fence removal for the following week. But first, I had one last surprise for Margaret Henderson. The fence came down on a beautiful Saturday morning in December. I'd invited Tom Bradley and several other Sunset Ridge homeowners to help with the removal, partly as a gesture of goodwill and partly because I wanted witnesses to what I was about to do. As the work crews were pulling down the last section of cedar fencing, I saw Margaret Henderson walking along the shoreline. She'd been conspicuously absent from the neighborhood since her removal as HOA president, but apparently, she couldn't resist watching her defeat be made visible. I walked down to meet her at the water's edge. "Hello, Margaret?" She turned to face me, and I was shocked by what I saw. The perfectly composed woman who'd stepped onto my dock 6 months earlier looked haggard and defeated. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair was unkempt, and there was something broken in her eyes. "You won," she said flatly. "I hope you're happy." "I'm not happy, Margaret. I'm tired. This whole thing was unnecessary." She laughed bitterly. "Unnecessary? You humiliated me in front of the entire community. You cost me $47,000. You turned my neighbors against me." "No, Margaret. You did all of that to yourself. All I ever did was defend my family's property." For a moment, I thought she might start crying. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and summoned one last flash of the arrogance that had started this whole mess. "This isn't over, David. I'm appealing the county's decision. I'm filing complaints with the state. You may have won this battle, but the war isn't finished." That's when I smiled, because Margaret Henderson still didn't understand what she'd lost. "Margaret, before you file any more complaints or appeals, there's something you should know." I pulled out a manila folder, the same kind she'd carried when she first threatened my boat. "While you were fighting to steal my Marina, I did some research into property values around Crystal Lake." Her face went pale again. "It turns out that lakefront properties in this area sell for an average of $200,000 more than comparable homes without water access. Your house, for example, was purchased for $1.1 million specifically because of its lake proximity. But here's the interesting part. Without guaranteed lake access, similar homes in the area sell for around $750,000. I handed her a real estate appraisal I'd commissioned. "Your property lost approximately $350,000 in value during the 6 weeks my fence was up. And every day you spent fighting me instead of negotiating cost you and your neighbors money." Margaret stared at the appraisal with growing horror. "But here's what you really don't understand," I continued. "I never needed your Marina fees or your HOA politics. My family has been happy on this lake for 70 years and will be happy here for 70 more. You, on the other hand, bought a house you can't afford to lose money on in a community that now sees you as the person who almost cost them their lake access permanently." I turned to walk away, then paused. "Good luck with those appeals, Margaret. But before you file them, you might want to ask yourself, what happens if you make me angry enough to put that fence back up?" She didn't answer. She just stood there on the shoreline, holding a piece of paper that quantified exactly how much her arrogance had cost her. 6 months later, Margaret Henderson quietly sold her house and moved back to Seattle. Tom Bradley told me she accepted an offer $400,000 below her original purchase price. The new owners are a young couple with twin daughters who love to fish off my dock. The Sunset Ridge HOA kept their word completely. They compensated me for my legal expenses, issued a formal apology that was posted in the community newsletter, and withdrew all legal actions. More importantly, they instituted new policies requiring community-wide votes before filing any complaints against neighboring property owners. My Marina is busier than ever. The new HOA board worked with me to establish informal guidelines for boat traffic and environmental protection, but they're suggestions, not mandates. Families still bring their children to fish off my pier. Old Pete is back to launching his bass boat every weekend. The Martinez family has resumed their Sunday fishing trips. But the biggest change is in how people treat the Marina privilege. Before Margaret's campaign, lake access was just something people took for granted. Now, there's a genuine appreciation for the fact that my family chooses to share our facilities with the community. I regularly find thank you notes tucked under my boat covers, cookies left on my dock, and Christmas cards from families I've never formally met. My sailboat is still there, of course. Still the same 1985 Catalina 30 that Margaret Henderson claimed was an unsightly influence on the neighborhood. Last month, Tom Bradley asked if I'd be willing to teach his teenage son how to sail. We spent 3 Saturday mornings out on the lake, and the kid's a natural. He reminds me of myself at that age, completely in love with the feeling of wind and water and freedom. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my deck in the evening, watching the sun set over Crystal Lake, I think about what my grandfather would have made of this whole situation. He was a practical man who believed in neighborly kindness, but also in standing up for what's right. I think he would have approved of how things worked out. Margaret Henderson taught me something important. Property rights aren't just about ownership, they're about respect. For 70 years, my family shared our Marina because our neighbors respected what we were offering. When that respect disappeared, sharing became impossible. But when respect returned, so did the generosity. The lake is peaceful again. The community is stronger than before. And my boat, that unsightly old sailboat that started this whole mess, continues to float serenely at my dock, exactly where she belongs. If you've enjoyed this story of HOA drama and property rights justice, please subscribe to the channel for more real-life tales of neighbor disputes, legal battles, and the sweet satisfaction of standing up for what's right. Sometimes the little guy really can win, but only when he knows exactly what he's fighting for. Would you have handled Margaret Henderson differently? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing your thoughts on these neighborhood battlegrounds we sometimes find ourselves in. Until next time, remember, always read your property deeds carefully. You never know what rights you might be sitting on.